Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I'm your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Please go to the Gracefully Graying website and also our YouTube channel and like them both. Today on Gracefully Graying, I am pleased to welcome as my guest my friend Karen McDonald, who is a candidate for the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office. Karen, welcome to Gracefully Graying.
Welcome to you. Hello, thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. My first question is, you had a judgeship that really, once you won, it's like a lifetime appointment because no one's ever defeated a sitting judge in Oakland County, in the circuit court level at least. What prompted you to leave? And you had to leave a year before you could run, literally, to meet the election requirements, if I'm not mistaken, to run for Oakland County Prosecutor. So what prompted you to do this?
Yeah, that's really the scarier part of this story. It's pretty common for people to run for other offices once they're in an elected position. But normally judges run for positions in the higher courts, which means they don't have to step down from their seat. You can essentially continue your job and also be running your campaign. And that gives you some assurance that if you're not successful, you still have the job. Because I went from a nonpartisan seat to a partisan seat, I had to leave my position a year ahead of the filing deadline. So that was in April. So I stepped down about 6 months ago. And I stepped down to challenge a 12-year incumbent in the Democratic primary. So, I think it was a bit of a shock for most people that I would give up a job like that. It's a great job. I loved the job. But B, take such a risk. I had no assurance that I was going to be successful, but I believed in myself and I believed in what I was doing. And that was really it came from a place of seeing every day in my courtroom a lot of things that I wanted to fix or help fix and really couldn't be fixed by a judge because, there's a lot of information out right now, which I think is great, trying to educate people. And hopefully we can do that a little bit here today about why the prosecutor, your local prosecutor, is so important and influential in our daily lives. The prosecutor decides who's going to be charged with a crime and what crime they're going to be charged with. The prosecutor makes recommendations and has a huge impact on whether or not you'll be granted cash bail, on what kind of sentence you might get, whether or not you're going to plea or go to trial. And how they conduct themselves really has a tremendous impact on our not only people who are charged with crimes, but victims of crimes. And so what I saw was just our current prosecutor just not getting it right in a lot of ways, not charging cases she should, and charging cases and drawing this line in the sand of not being flexible or reasonable or smart. First, her position on treatment courts, I think, just was a real problem for me. She doesn't participate or believe in the treatment courts. And the data shows drug treatment court, we have a veterans treatment court. I hope to help establish a mental health treatment court. These courts work. And there's a way, they're just a mechanism to address the underlying reasons why people come into the criminal justice system. And to me, that just makes sense. And I think it makes sense for most people. So, stepped down in April 2019. The primary was in August 2020, just a few months ago, and I succeeded. In fact, I succeeded by a very large margin. And I think that really was a public mandate about wanting a prosecutor who's going to be practicing smart criminal justice reform.
Karen, you ran against someone who had won several terms, who had never lost an election. And basically, she was a district judge, circuit judge, court of appeals judge, and then a prosecutor. And you not only beat her in the primary, you trounced her, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, everyone asks me if I was surprised. It doesn't matter. You do polls, you do have a sense of what the energy around your campaign is and who's supporting you and what the public wants. But I'm just wired in a way that, this is my second countywide campaign. And in my last election for judge, I also had a contested primary and then a general. So I'm technically on my fourth campaign, and I run every campaign like I'm in last place. I just do. I don't think you can be successful as a candidate and really do a good job unless you really have a fire in your belly. And and also I don't pay much attention to polls, because I think we've seen in the last few years that polling is sometimes not so accurate. So I was surprised, but really, really energized and comforted, not because of my success as much as what it meant for our county and how people really just want to do things in a smarter way, and they want change.
Tell our viewers a little bit more about your background, Karen.
Well, I grew up in a small town in Michigan. I'm not from the Detroit area. After undergrad, I became a public school teacher for 3 years, and then went to law school. After law school, I had a research position in the Court of Appeals, but ended up actually in the prosecutor's office. I worked for another prosecutor, and I mainly prosecuted child sexual assault cases. So those were first-degree felony cases, very difficult cases to try, very difficult cases to win, and just very, very difficult to deal with every day, because you're dealing with a child who's been abused. And that was really important work to me. I then went to private practice and became a partner at the largest law firm in Oakland County, the Jaffe Law Firm. And then in 2012, there was an open seat on the Oakland Circuit Court. Judge Ed Sosnick was retiring, and I ran for that seat and was successful, and then elected for a second term. And then a year into my second term, decided to step down and run for prosecutor. And here I am today. Not knowing, by the way, that I'd be facing a global pandemic in the middle of my campaign, a lot of things happening in the criminal justice system, the Black Lives Matter movement, which really put a spotlight on the racial disparities that do exist in our system. And, all of those, the arrow points straight back to the prosecutor and how we're going to really change things.
We need change, that's clear. Karen, in your brochures, you talk about creating a much more transparent, accountable, accessible prosecutor's office. Tell us how you intend to accomplish this.
Well, I think in order for the public to have trust and confidence in their prosecutor and the criminal justice system, which we all need, right? Because if you're a victim of a crime, or you're charged with a crime, or a family member is charged with a crime, you want to know what your elected official is doing. And so I believe the way to do that is to be completely transparent and publish who you're charging and what you're charging people with, and what communities are they from. Obviously not their names, but we need to know, and we already do know, but right now it's not transparent. So it's very difficult to understand how many people of color are convicted and what their sentences are versus a white person. And, the data that we do have available nationwide, statewide, and even what we were able to look at ourselves in Oakland County, what we know is that even though we have a African-American population of somewhere between 13-14% in Oakland County, the conviction rates for that group of people are much higher. And so we have to ask the question, why? And what are we going to do about that? And I think being transparent about that is really important. I think being transparent about cases that involve police officers where you choose not to charge, you have to be transparent with the public about why. There's so much anger and feeling of, that the system isn't fair. And there's two reasons for that. One, it isn't fair. And so we got to work to make it fair, but also we have to work to educate and be open and transparent about why we make certain decisions.
Karen, tell us about your plans for a conviction integrity unit and what you mean by that exactly.
So there are about 50 conviction integrity units around the country, and they are in offices all across the country, whether they're led by Republicans, Democrats, it doesn't matter. then the idea is you take somebody who typically comes from the defense background and assign them to be in the prosecutor's office, and their whole job is to evaluate new evidence that comes to light in prior cases, and then make recommendations about whether they think relief should be granted. It could be a new trial. It could be a total exoneration. We just had a case in Wayne County where a man served, I think, over 30 years, and then DNA evidence came to light and he was exonerated. So I think it's important that we acknowledge to the public that we sometimes make mistakes. And this is important work. And I think the public agrees with me on this, because we've just had, the criminal justice system has evolved, and, there are people who have been falsely accused and convicted and are serving time. And we need to address that.
Karen, we're in an era of a lot of hate crimes, a lot of anti-Semitism, anti-Black, just about every culture. And it's sick, it's sad. And you have plans for a functioning hate crimes unit. Tell us about that.
So when I say functioning hate crimes unit, I don't mean we're going to prosecute cases that arise out of somebody's race or gender or how they identify. I'm actually going to dedicate a prosecutor to working on these cases from the get-go, meaning they make decisions about how to charge, when to charge, and then follow the case all the way through. Normally in a regular case, you have a person charging the case, and then it goes to a different prosecutor in the district court, and then it goes to a different prosecutor in the felony court. And when you're doing a specialized unit like that, you want, what we call vertical prosecution. Because look, I know, Henry, you're upset in what you're seeing every day. I'm upset in what I'm seeing every day. We have crimes that are totally motivated by somebody's race, against the LGBTQ community, religion. And it's just astonishing to me that here we are in 2020, and these things are not only still going on, but we have an uptick. So I think a good prosecutor's office has to address that.
Karen, cash bail has become a big issue where people are often incarcerated because they may be charged with something and they can't come up with bail, so they just sit in the county jail or wherever. You have a proposal to eliminate cash bail and coercive plea bargaining. Tell us about that.
Well, my first goal, and the first goal of the prosecutor, is always public safety. So if somebody's posing a safety threat to our community, they should not be granted bail. And it doesn't matter to me whether they have $10,000 for cash bail or not, they're still a threat. So right now, the way the system works is, if you and I both are pulled over and we don't have a valid driver's license, and so we're charged with driving while license suspended, and we go to court, and the judge decides that there will be a $200 cash bail, and you have your $200 and I don't. I go to the Oakland County jail until my trial date. And in the meantime, I'm not paying my bills. I'm not going to work. I'm not parenting my children. And I just don't know anybody who thinks that's a good idea. We either should be, you're either a safety threat or you're not. But requiring somebody to remain in the Oakland County jail because they don't have $200 is ridiculous. It costs a lot to the taxpayers to have this person housed in the Oakland County jail. The other purpose of bail is to ensure the person returns for their court date. And the data from states who have already adopted and eliminated cash bail, like Kentucky and Washington, D.C., shows that it has not in any way impacted the rate of people returning for their court dates, meaning cash bail isn't really the reason people are returning for their court dates. The reason people are returning for their court dates is because they have ties to the community, they have jobs, they have children, they have families, and there's no motivation for them to leave town. So again, it's just really all about approaching things with common sense. Right now, that system hurts two groups of people of color and poor people. And it's not just, it's not fair, and it doesn't make any sense.
Karen, what about coercive plea bargaining?
So right now, there are a lot of cases where even though somebody believes that they are innocent, they are somewhat threatened if they go to trial that the prosecutor will ask for a harsher sentence or add a charge, and the stakes are just too high. So we have a lot of people pleading guilty who are not guilty. I mean, listen, we have a right to a trial by jury. The Constitution protects that. I believe it's one of our basic rights as a free society. And if the criminal justice system is making it impossible to exercise that right, that's a problem. That's a big problem.
You have plans and to do more with regard to veterans treatment courts, drug treatment courts, mental health courts, and I'm lumping them all together, but they're all important, but we do have time factors. So tell us about some of these plans.
So the idea for treatment courts is a way for somebody to address their underlying reasons why they came into the criminal justice system. In the case of our drug treatment courts, we have a substance abuse issue, and the way that it works is somebody, if they're a good candidate, they are required to do certain things that are treatment based and supervised by the court and the whole team of people, the judge, the defense attorney, the services part, the treatment part, and then right now the prosecutor in Oakland County is not at the table, but I'm going to change that. And then if they do everything they're supposed to do, then at the end you may dismiss or reduce their charge. Right now, we don't have the ability to do that because the prosecutor isn't involved. So there can be no agreement between the prosecutor and the defense attorney. So there's a lot of data out there about treatment courts and how they work and how they keep low-level, non-violent offenders out of the criminal justice system, which is what we want. We have to make the distinction here when we're talking about prosecuting people and incarcerating people. Are we incarcerating because we're afraid it's a public safety issue, or we're just mad at the person? And the data shows that if we can keep nonviolent low-level offenders out of jail or prison, we are all safer because of that. When you take somebody and you sentence somebody to 2 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections, and then release that person without ever basically addressing any of the issues that brought them into the system, we're less safe because the rate of reoffense goes up. And we don't have a lot of reentry services right now. I believe there's one reentry program in Oakland County. So we have returning citizens from the corrections system with no resources. They've lost their job. They've lost their housing. They have a very difficult time getting housing or jobs with felonies on their record. And in the meantime, they may have lost their children. When I was on the family court, I presided over the child abuse and neglect docket. And these people were incarcerating. We need to make darn sure that's the smart choice, because we're leaving children behind who are not being parented. And that's a significant issue. And by no means am I suggesting that we don't hold people accountable, or that we ever put public safety, on the back burner. That public safety is a top priority for me. But what I know about the criminal justice system is that we are actually safer when we approach criminal justice in a smarter way. If it worked, if this whole tough on crime, law and order, 3 strikes, you're out, going to prison, if it worked, I would be advocating for it, but we know it doesn't work. It makes us less safe. And it's actually a bipartisan issue embraced across the country. And in fact, a few years ago, Donald Trump was all for it. Now he's sort of pivoted to a very traditional, conventional law and order. It really just plays on people's fears. And I think that's what my opponent's trying to do. I'm not interested in making people afraid. I'm interested in building and ensuring public safety and trust in their elected officials. And I think, you have children, I have children. I want to be safe, but I also don't believe that the Oakland County Jail is the place for somebody who has a significant mental health issue that can be treated.
What you're saying, and it's important, is that you believe in justice with compassion, for lack of a better word. And
yeah, I mean, compassion towards victims of crime, compassion for people charged with crimes who, again, this to me is very common sense. Do we want to address things so that we don't have the same reoffense over and over and over again? Or do we just want to, incarcerate somebody and not care what happens later? I care what happens later because I live in this community and it matters to me.
Karen, as I'm part of the Gracefully Graying, you've now reached that level. The issue really is there's a lot of crime aimed at the elderly. There are scams. There's so much out there. There's violence. What are some of the issues that you see that you'll be dealing with as a prosecutor with regard to really those 50 and over are the majority of our population in this county? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a big issue. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is a really important issue for me because my parents are aging, and my dad, who's a really smart guy. I mean, I was just talking to him the other day, and he kind of just let it slip that he had bought something over the phone and it never showed up, and it was a couple $100, and I thought, in combination of the fact that we have these phone scams and real attempts to defraud elderly people, we also have that same age group is the most rising in use of social media. So at the same time, you have the elderly population getting on Facebook and YouTube and all of those platforms, which is just a whole new avenue, right, to really scam somebody. And what we've seen is that that's pretty easy to do, not just for the elderly population, but everybody, to be honest. So we have a special victims unit in the prosecutor's office currently. I can't say with certainty what my plans are in terms of structuring that, but I do know that I will be with 100% certainty assigning a prosecutor to deal with elder abuse, because it's its own area and it requires a certain type of prosecutor to handle those cases.
Karen, how are you
educating? I really want to be a more transparent, accessible office. So once we're allowed to go out again and see everybody, spending time in our senior centers, I think for prosecutors is really important.
How will you target violent crimes and criminals?
Well, I've spent my whole career trying to advocate and protect kids and families, and sat with children and families, parents who were victims of very serious and awful crimes. And that is my true calling in terms of being a prosecutor. That's why I left the bench. I really wanted to advocate for victims and people, our most vulnerable populations. But also understanding that a lot of times we can prevent those crimes by addressing the underlying reasons why people come into the criminal justice system. Trying to focus on our juvenile justice system is very important to me. We know that those kids end up in the adult criminal justice system. We know that a child who's removed from a home for abuse or neglect with just 1 day in foster care increases their likelihood by 7 times that they will face homelessness, mental health, incarceration. We know that. So I think, right now, the family court, the abuse and neglect docket and the juvenile docket are kind of considered, not a serious court. And so we don't need to put serious prosecutors there or really focus too much on that. But I just disagree. I think it's such an important area because that's our way of identifying children who might end up later as victims of crime or being charged with crimes.
Another point you've raised is treating children as children. Explain that to us.
Well, the United States Supreme Court held that juvenile life without parole sentences were unconstitutional. And then they further held that all the prosecutors across the country had to evaluate, so that's essentially retroactive, and determine which cases of the juvenile life without parole sentence, with which one of those you would still go forward on, meaning there's only, according to the law, a very rare case where you would still maintain that somebody who committed a crime when they were a minor should remain in prison for the rest of their life. And out of 47 of those, the current prosecutor said 44 should remain in prison for the rest of their life. And some of these cases, the person who's serving a life without parole sentence for something she did when she was 15 or 16 wasn't the primary actor in the event, meaning she was with or maybe, assisted in some passive way with the person who actually committed a homicide, but she's still in prison for the rest of her life. And not to say that we should, by any means, not address that and that incarceration is not appropriate where we have a serious crime. In some cases it is, but to sentence a juvenile with life without parole, what we know about brain development and the frontal lobe now, it just doesn't make any sense. And then I saw a 10-year-old in my courtroom come in with shackles who was charged with assault and battery for hitting somebody with a stick. And that just is not right. It just isn't right. And anybody who has a kid or knows a kid knows that,
We've got about 10 seconds. I'd like you to I wish we had more time. Give us some final thoughts before we wrap up our show, Karen.
My final thoughts are that Oakland County deserves somebody who's going to be smart on crime and protect our public safety, but also care about who's coming into the criminal justice system and addressing that. And lastly, vote. We have to exercise our constitutional right to vote, and it's easier than ever. You can walk into your clerk's office right now, request a ballot. You could register, request a ballot, and vote right there. Return it to your clerk's office. That's a great way, in my mind, to avoid the issues with the Postal Service and also not have to show up at the polls on November 3rd. But however you decide to do it, please vote.
Karen, I want to thank you so much for being my guest on Gracefully Graying. I wish we had more time, but we're out of time. And I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.